everybody, I'm Warren Pellick from Lawtrades, back as always with our weekly news update. I'm joined, as always, by my good friend Matt Margolis. Matt, tell the good people how you doing.
Living the dream. I feel like every episode I have to say it now.
You have to say it. This has become part of your contract.
Oh my gosh. I didn't even read this. What part of the contract?
You've entered it. By opening this account, you've entered the contract. You've agreed to its terms.
Damn, the Lawtrades terms and services. I didn't even see this in there.
This is a backdoor advertisement for Lawtrades. This is how. Yeah. All right. Let's take a look at what we're talking about otherwise here on the podcast. So this week we're looking at Quentin Tarantino's NFT troubles, which is a pretty interesting story. Taking a look at some FinTech ups and downs, part of their boom and bust cycle. And Uber is delivering quite a mess to some Europeans. Plus, we're talking about big layoffs and big law, a victory for the minor leagues, and quiet quitting. So let's get into it. So the first thing here, the first major story is Quentin Tarantino, the writer-director, released a set of 7 NFTs last year around his film Pulp Fiction. Now, Quentin Tarantino doesn't own the IP to the film, but he does retain the rights to the script itself.
Sure.
So his NFTs were supposed to be tied to a handwritten copy of the script. Miramax, who owns the rights, who owns the IP to the film, says no one is buying this because they care about the script. They're buying it because of our IP, which is the film, and sued to stop the auction of the NFTs. But in a late development this month, both sides said, you know what, we're going to settle, which really makes it sound like they're going to go in on this together and kind of figured out a deal on their own.
That is interesting to finally see. It's not finally, because people have been using NFTs in this direction for at least several months. But that's an interesting argument by Miramax, where it's like, they don't care about the script. They care about Pulp Fiction. Right. Pulp Fiction.
Right.
Like, that is fascinating. I know there's a... Now, let me ask you this. So, who's buying these NFTs?
Only one was sold. So this is actually an interesting twist.
Sure.
Only one was sold, the first one, by a group or just an account known as a non-DAO, which is a...
Oh, it's a DAO? Oh, nice.
It's a DAO, which is a term meaning effectively an anonymous buyer.
Well...
it sold for $1.1 million, and as soon as it did, the marketplace shut down the remaining 6 NFT, the auction for the remaining 6, saying extreme market volatility, we need to close this. So
that's not suspicious. And so DAOs are these decentralized organizations. These imagine just like a group of people all together, and they're really I think the idea is like a true democracy, right? Like everyone's vote counts. No one group I guess leads the charge, right, on behalf of the group. It's literally who makes the decision. So this is like the most Web3 thing I've ever seen, is that we have a DAO buying an NFT from Pulp Fiction, and then causing the auction to shut down. I can't even make this up.
But it points to something that we've talked about here in the past before, which is this whole space from, both NFTs and crypto. This whole space, who owns the rights? Yeah. What does the NFT actually do?
Is it a security?
Who's behind it?
Yeah.
Is it a security? On and on and on. There are so many questions that remain sure and are in some form of litigation and whatever in the Web3 space that you run into issues like this, right? And we don't have all the answers. And I'm sure Tarantino, was correct in saying, I own the script, I'm going to do what I want with the script, and Miramax as well. Nobody's buying it for your script. They're buying it because Pulp Fiction has has become a cult classic. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very odd argument. I guess it's talking out loud. It's kind of odd to think that you could decouple the script from the actual IP. It just doesn't make sense to me. You are. You're not buying. It's almost like you're just the thought process is like, oh, I'm just buying words. You're not buying words. You're buying a story. So, and the story is Pulp Fiction.
Exactly.
So,
exactly. You're buying a brand.
More of this litigation. We've already seen plenty of it because some of these exchanges have gone bust, and some of these coins have resulted, or tokens have resulted in litigation because maybe they're fraudulent, weren't fraudulent. So you're going to see just this whole new realm of litigation. I mean, I wasn't alive then. You weren't alive then, but probably when we started to see big regulations when it came to general securities, right? So it's
And it's valuable, right? It's valuable because, and I'm not going to speak to the entire Web3 space, but just to Hollywood, you're seeing more and more film franchises releasing NFTs, and who owns the IP around it and all that. And more producers are using NFTs as a way to fund and structure investment or raise capital for their own projects. So it is becoming a thing. Right? It's undoubtedly something that we're going to continue to use in the years to come. So yeah, we do need litigation. We do need precedents here.
Agreed.
Well, on that note, next story we're going to talk about here, FinTech, which became a huge thing in 2021. The Economist was saying 1 out of every $5 invested by VCs in 2021 was into FinTech, are now going bust for several reasons. Mainly because a lot of their innovations, like there's a firm called Wealthfront, which kind of came up with robo-advisors rather than, you go to Charles Schwab or whomever and you have an actual human being as your advisor. They came up with robo-advisors. Robinhood famously had free trading, all these things. The bigger players in that space, right? Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, all these huge traditional banks are just co-opting that tech. And now all these fintech firms are kind of going bust.
It's interesting.
So that's an interesting development.
Yeah, I mean, fintech is like a genre of tech, right? Like it's all of these financial technology companies, and there's so many. Like you see, and I guess to your point and to the article's point, there's like a subset, especially in the trading space, that are getting just crushed. But there are plenty of fintechs that have really been thriving because you're right. They're like some aspect outside of the trading space.
Right.
There's names in my head. I want to say them out loud. I'm also afraid to say them out loud. But there's plenty of fintechs I know of that we all know of that are doing very well. But it's interesting that in 2021, I guess that was the era. In retrospect, that was the era of VC investment into fintech. That was hot. And now it's and towards the end of 2021, probably maybe in the middle, now VCs are investing in Web3, a lot of Web3, or you're just putting all your money into Adam Newman. So it's your choice.
That took a turn.
One of the two, or it's a combination.
But another interesting note here, and this is something kind of that Axios was writing about, even TechCrunch had something on this, is that federal regulators are now kind of looking at, there's a lot of there potential mergers and investments by the big banks, the traditional banks, into these fintech companies outside of VCs. And it seems like in one case, Wealthfront, there's a lot of kind of federal regulators looking at these deals and kind of starting to scrutinize what's going on here and what these valuations are. And it's, they're raising some eyebrows. Yeah, and it's starting to scare off a lot of investors, starting to scare off a lot of merger deals. And it's kind of like, the whip is kind of...
It's interesting.
Cracking over the space.
It's interesting to see regulators come down. Well, it's not that interesting. And right, you're going to see the SEC come down, especially if you're in that space. You're going to see, depending on again what you're in. Maybe it's the CFPB if you're in the consumer finance space, or I don't know. I guess technically speaking, it could be in the that would be crazy because fintechs are startups, but the DOJ and antitrust setting. But it's interesting to see that that all the regulators are wait a minute, hold on, what are you guys doing?
Right.
Just because again, I mean, they're startups, right? They're just this. Generally, I would imagine they would be mostly overlooked. Probably not always overlooked, because if you're new in a space and we're not sure what you do and you're dealing with consumers, especially financial, right, in a financial setting, you expect much more scrutiny than the traditional startup. But it's interesting that once they're getting acquired and those conversations are being had, that's where they're coming in. They're time out. What's going on here?
Well, look, they're not getting acquired for peanuts here, right? This Wealthfront was about to be acquired for almost $1.5 billion, right? We're talking
big money,
large amounts of capital, right? Exactly, by international players, by huge banks. Yep. So, we've reached a level, just like we were talking about with NFTs and crypto. We're reaching a level where it's widespread enough, where there's enough money behind it, where enough people are affected that we need to start taking a look, really, and
well, look.
Kind of sniffing around.
I'll say this: the valuations point that you made is well taken as well. I think in 2021, you can write a little. Someone's going to yell at me for this. You can write a little napkin and say, "This is my business plan," and you just raised $100 million at $1 trillion valuation, right? Like that was the joke where maybe due diligence wasn't amazing. There was just so much money flowing that just everyone got a term sheet. So now in 2022, as we look retrospectively at all those high valuations, we're like, and now when people are getting acquired, we're like, oh, I'm valued, I'm valued at $50 billion. You look back, you open the books, you're like, that's not right.
Yeah.
That was
what's going on
here? That's a 2021
yeah.
$50 million, $50 billion. That's not 2022 $50 billion.
Yeah, the environment has definitely shifted.
Oh, yeah.
So, but hopefully that just helps people in the long run. So,
sure.
We'll see. All right. Well, the final major story here. Let's take a look over at Europe. Actually, this is a story coming out of Western Europe. It looks like during the pandemic, and this was going on here as well. Delivery apps like Uber Eats saw their numbers just shoot up. Right. I'm sure you were the same way, but I was ordering food off of Uber Eats quite a bit during the depth of the pandemic. Exactly. And in order to fill all those orders and to keep up with things, Uber Eats hired a lot of undocumented migrants in Europe, right? So a lot of people were coming over from the Middle East, from North Africa, et cetera. We're starting accounts as deliverers on the app. And for the last 2 years, we're doing great. We're making a lot of money and working the apps. In the last 2 months, as order numbers have fallen quite drastically for Uber Eats, for Postmates, et cetera, all of a sudden, Uber Eats has deleted some 2,500 accounts just in France, and I'm sure that number is the same in Italy and in other places. And now a lot of unions are saying, hold up, you've exploited these people who were making their living off of your app when you needed them, and now that you want to save your numbers, you're just destroying their livelihoods.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, because one, I'm not a labor employment attorney, and two, I'm not a labor employment attorney in Europe. But I didn't know that these drivers were unionized out in France or in other European countries.
The drivers and the deliverers. Yeah, it looks like there's at least two from a story by Wired. One is the Collective of Platform Couriers, or CLAP, in France, and another one is let me find the name here. Something international. International. I don't have it here in front of me. But yeah, there's at least two unions that are representing these people.
That's fascinating.
And putting together protests, it looks like.
Yeah, because in the States, certain companies are fighting against this driving unions, and in Europe, it's just there's many more in areas that I never would expect. So that's fascinating. I can't speak to the story. I don't know. I guess I don't know the validity of the claim, if they were taken off the platform accidentally, or they were taken off because of whatever, or they were taken off truly because they wanted to shade some numbers because their stock prices are a bit low. But not a good look. It's definitely not a good look.
Not a good look. And I should mention that this is happening in conjunction, this Uber Eats, this protest against Uber Eats is happening in conjunction with Uber drivers, right, on their main platform, protesting in Brussels, where the EU is located, the EU headquarters. Taxi drivers from across the continent are saying, hey, Uber came in, got real cozy with, the leaders of France and Germany and other places, skirted plenty of rules and regulations, and now we're suffering, and you need to do something. So these are kind of like these twin allegations, I'll say.
Running parallel right now in Europe. Again, I can't speak to the truth of claims. Again, It is a competitor. It is but you can't discount, because I will say, I'm sure in the States as well, they probably got very cozy with different state entities, right? Because there was always a massive fight in the very beginning of even allowing Uber to be, working in these areas. So, again, we can't speak to the validity of the claims, but it is fascinating to see these two parallel movements happening in Europe right now over not completely similar, but fairly similar. I would say, at least slightly similar issues.
Right. Not a good look for Uber.
Nope.
That's for sure. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of these smaller stories. The first one, and this is maybe something that you've heard of from colleagues, from peers. The last 2 years were a boom time for big law, for the whole legal industry. But now, as the economy is winding down and cooling off, it appears as though hiring is starting to cool off at big law firms.
Yep.
and maybe even some layoffs are coming.
Definitely. I think there's this article. It's not big law, but like kind of adjacent in finance. I've heard the same thing with the big banks. Yeah, folks. So what we saw was massive hiring, all firms, not just big law, medium law, small law, regional law, whatever you call it, right?
The whole industry.
Industry. And the work is, obviously, one, the fear is that there's an impending recession. So everyone's like, oh my gosh, like, will there be work there? And I think, two, some of the work is already dried up at least a little bit, especially depending on what spaces you work in. Certain spaces, you're going to see work probably for a long time. I would say in the casualty space, right, like litigation. So like think negligence-related cases because people are going to slip and fall, right? So it's got. But when you're talking big tech transactions, so you're talking M&A, if M&A starts to cool off, especially if you're doing a bunch of SPAC public offering, right, which that market cooled off tremendously.
Right.
Those jobs, maybe I don't need to backfill this position, or maybe I don't need to hire for all these positions anymore. Right. So I definitely think you're going to see it. I definitely think I've also heard of a trend, which I think we're going to get to, like the opposite of it. But I've heard the trend is quiet firing in the legal sense, where folks are not getting enough work on purpose, and they're like, "Hey, you're not hitting your hours. What's going on?" And they slowly transition people out through that means.
Well, kind of adjacent to that, let me ask, and this would just be pure speculation, but do you think that all these law firms over the last 2 years, because there was such an influx of work, overhired?
Yes.
That they're like,
they're like, and like to the umpth degree, like hiring whole tranches. But I will say, to the point of they hired heavily, or they try to hire heavily, but in the same vein, a lot of people weren't looking for those jobs. A lot of people were reevaluating their lives at that time. So they're like, maybe they hired 10 people, but they probably anticipated that 5 of them were going to quit because of the Great Resignation, and that's speculation, truly. But I recall reading articles as well where like there was huge tranches of folks that were like, we demonize going in-house for the longest time, but it's actually awesome. We demonize going to these boutiques, but it's actually awesome. I have enough of a book, I can go solo. So I think, yes, they probably hired too much, but they were also anticipating attrition.
Well, we're on the other side of that coin, right?
Oh, yeah.
It looks like it's coming. So, yeah. Okay, well, next story up here is good news for minor league baseball players. For the first time in 100 years, the MLB is now recognizing the MLB Players Association as the formal union for minor league players. So,
good for them.
Congrats to them.
Yeah.
It kind of joins that larger trend of unionization that we've been talking about here for months.
I'm sure we'll see more. We'll definitely see more folks unionize. Interesting for the minor league. Great, because I do think when you're in like AA, AAA ball, you probably aren't getting you probably are not looked at as fondly, right, as maybe an MLB player. I think that's probably entirely true, and I'm sure they're not receiving as good as treatment. And I'm just speculating, but as good as treatment as maybe the MLB.
Yeah, but again, just speculation. I don't know every player in the minor leagues, but there have been plenty of news stories about just how grueling, how tough the life is of a minor league player, and how little they make, and how many hours everything takes.
Yep.
And so for them to have some sort of formal representation finally is fantastic.
Absolutely.
So I hope the best for them. Yeah. All right, last story here, and this is something you just alluded to, quiet quitting. So there are finally some numbers in, some data looking at this trend, and it looks like 4 in 10 young workers say that they don't even know what's expected of them at the job. 18% of U.S. employees are actively disengaged at work. Crazy numbers, and these are from Gallup, right? So these are legitimate numbers from the Gallup poll. There's something like 50% of workers are disengaged at work. All these things, right? The pandemic kind of made us reevaluate a lot of what's going on in the office and our own relationship to work, and it's starting to rear its head.
I agree. I think on the flip side, on the employer side, you have folks working like 2 jobs because because people were quitting because of illnesses, right? Because of COVID or long COVID. So folks were picking up all these extra work, and employers, plenty of employers were like, hey, like, thanks for the great work. You're going to keep doing it. And I do think that many were not paid what they should have been paid, or were not promoted when they should have been promoted because they were doing the work of two folks. So I look at these articles, I look at the numbers, I look at them, with grain of salt, because actively disengaged is doing just as much work as they were supposed to do per their job description.
Fair, but for 4 in 10 young workers, which I assume is the cohort between, let's say, 18 and 35, I'd assume. But for 4 in 10 young workers to say they don't even know what's expected of them,
that's big.
That's huge, and you're brewing kind of this disillusion, right? You're brewing this. I don't know, how does that, when that cohort gets older and they start to run things and whatever, I don't know what that turns into, right? Where you just have a whole generation of people like that.
I expect you'll see Gen Z, for example, probably like younger millennials, Gen Z. I expect them to come up and to be managers, employers, what have you. I expect them to lay out exactly what job descriptions look like. I fully expect it, because you're right. I think they had no idea when they came to the job market. Granted, it was probably a more favorable job market. They came in, they're like, you want me to do what? Do you want me to do all these things? Because as a millennial, that's what we came into. We came into a job market where they said, you do all of these things and you got to do even more, because that's how you get ahead. So I fully expect when they are the employers, when they are the managers, they're going to be like, this is the box you're working in. If you want to work outside of that box, that's great. But this is what I expect of you.
I agree. Here are exactly your job description. Moreover, though, I do expect them to be more, I would say, favorable managers in that they promote maybe a work-life balance. They promote kind of not taking work home with you in such the same way that you and I as millennials were, and before us as well, were expected to. So I would hope that they do kind of change the nature of the work-life balance. That would be a very good thing.
Fully expect it. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, cool. Well, those were the stories for the week. So, thank you so much for talking me through all these. As always.
Thanks, Oren. I appreciate it, man. And I'll talk to you next week.
Cool. We'll talk next week.